Subversion. This word has come to the fore in our geek community with increasing and alarming frequency these past few years as story after story, hero after hero, myth after myth is subverted beyond all recognition. Subversion undermines narratives, characters, expectations, and quality. It causes universes to lose coherence and fly apart. Characters lose the threads of their history, start behaving in ways that they never would, and in a very real sense cease to exist. Fictional entities live fragile lives. Unlike you and I, they lack even the corporeal means to occupy space in real life, to have a physicality that allows them to persist even when slandered or forgotten. Many human beings live lonely, isolated lives, but even ignored and forgotten, these people still persist because their lives are facts, truths that they cannot contradict. There is an honesty to actual existence. Moral, immoral, wise or foolish, human beings persist and remain coherent because they have left their marks on the physical world. But characters in fictional worlds live solely in our minds. These characters, these places, these worlds, are sustained entirely by our conceptions of them. Character is action, Aristotle once famously said. The ancient Greeks laid the foundations of Western civilization, and this man, who virtually invented the art of theatrical criticism, understood even then that in the limited scope of narrative existence, a character must be what that character does. By what other metric can you evaluate a character? They have no actual jobs, no actual home, no real children, none of the hallmarks of manifestation that guarantee every actual human being actual existence. No, these plays of shadow and light are memorable solely for what they do. And thus, when you change their history by retconning their universe and perverting their histories, as Star Trek Discovery has done to revolting effect with canon violations, or when you completely subvert a character by making them behave in a manner that is completely inconsistent with the way they've behaved in past episodes, as Ruin Johnson infamously did with Luke Skywalker, you in effect strip that character of his reality, his credibility, and suddenly, in a very real sense, you have killed that character. When you strip a character of their personalities, when you destroy their histories by violating canon, there's nothing left but an actor slapped with a phony name that no longer applies. Get enough subversion into a franchise, and fans will forget why they ever loved it in the first place. And so it is with Game of Thrones. In this sad and truncated final season, and particularly in this last episode, the characters have been slandered and slain not by swords and dragons, but by writers who either no longer care about the coherence and continuity of their characters or never understood them in the first place. They have been slandered and slain because, as an invasion of the body snatchers, these characters have been replaced by pod people versions of themselves. Characters that look like them, sound like them, and behave in a manner entirely inconsistent with their histories and their past selves. In short, I accuse Benioff and Weiss of doing what the Night King could not do. These hacks have destroyed all life in Westeros, and nothing remains in the wake of their scripted annihilation but narrative ashes. Here then is Doomcock's verdict. Let us recite the crimes of Benioff and Weiss, character by character. Let us take stock of the slandered and the slain. The Night King was slandered and slain. The writers actually turned a 10,000-year-old god of death with eons to plot and plan his campaign into a moron. The Night King had the power to raise storms. The Night King had thousands of years to plan his assault. He had inhuman patience to endure the weight of 10,000 years to plot his rampage, and yet they have him, against all logic, violate every aspect of his character by assaulting the most fortified and prepared target in Westeros, simply because it was the first thing he encountered. Instead of snowing Winterfell in with an epic storm and then moving past them to conquer King's Landing with the elements of disbelief and surprise on his side, and double or triple the size of his army with little to no risk before spreading like a plague throughout Westeros, he idiotically falls on the most prepared, most dug-in target, armed with dragon glass and Valyrian steel, and then stupidly and impatiently enters the hot zone personally, just to kill Bran. A cripple so utterly worthless to anyone he doesn't even warn Theon to avoid rushing the Night King for another 30 seconds to save Theon's life, knowing Arya was just about to strike anyway. This incomprehensibly patient, inconceivably ancient being could not resist wandering into a still hot battle zone to kill Bran, when he could have safely sent his lieutenants to do it. And as a result of this narrative assassination of the Night King's character, he was cut down by a girl who ran up behind him. She didn't even sneak up behind him. She yelled as she ran past his lieutenants, who simply watched her go, and she killed him in the name of the writers, plot-armored to the max. Thus was the Night King slandered and slain, as were his elite lieutenants, who were suddenly turned into useless idiots, all in the name of plot. Because reason. Cersei Lannister was slandered and slain. For all these many seasons, Cersei has been depicted as a woman who, despite being occasionally blinded by her hatred, is undeniably brilliant and cunning. But in this season, Cersei has been turned into an ineffectual joke. She sends Bronn to kill Jaime and Tyrion, promising him an estate as payment for the service, then is slandered when the writers give her the opportunity to kill Tyrion, and she doesn't, conveniently forgetting she hired Bronn to kill him. And for the entirety of the Battle of King's Landing, they turn this brilliant, vindictive, and cunning villain into a passive idiot, staring out the window for the entirety of Episode 5. Indeed, the way Cersei was hugging the window, staring at the window, wouldn't budge from the window, one might surmise that Cersei is a window sexual with a fetish for scenic apertures. I think the solitary tear she shed like an Indian looking at litter in a commercial from the 60s was solely because as the dragon went meticulously down each street, killing everyone like a medieval Pac-Man, waka waka waka, Cersei realized that she would have to leave her window. And this evil monarch, who knew that when one plays the Game of Thrones, one wins or dies, cries like a whiny bitch trying to run from the destruction with the other man she ordered Bronn to kill, her brother lover, Jaime. Jaime Lannister was slandered and slain. The entirety of his character arc has trended toward an increased sense of himself as a just and noble man. He is touched and inspired by the shining example of Brienne of Tarth, even to the point of shattering tradition and knighting her, and rediscovers self-respect because of her. The writers slandered Jaime by having him completely abandon that character arc just to return to Cersei to die with her. Jaime knows Cersei has sent Bronn to kill him, knows what a monster she is, knows what a monster he is with her, and immediately after knighting and bedding Brienne, he simply gives up and returns to King's Landing, presumably to die. So much for all that character development. It was all for nothing. Jaime was and is Cersei's bitch. Hell, Jaime even slanders himself when he claims he never cared for the people to Tyrion in their farewell scene, conveniently forgetting that he killed a king to spare the people being burned alive. Way to ignore your own history, Sir Jaime, self-slandered and slain by Euron of all people, who skewered him like a kebab at a Castamere picnic, and slain by an idiotic plot that allows a twice-skewered Jaime run clean through side to side to pick himself up and walk around King's Landing like a guy with a hangnail, betraying nothing of his excruciating wounds beyond the occasional wince and the occasional bewildered glance about the set, as if saying, "Do you really want me to say this shit? And is this really the script we're shooting?" Tyrion was slandered and slain. He died in Episode 4 when Cersei shot him full of arrows when he was dumb enough, yet again, despite knowing Cersei all his life, to appeal to her compassion and sense of family to get her to surrender her power by approaching her castle while being targeted by archers at point-blank range. He's a small target, but not that small. Why he thought Cersei would put the welfare of her child ahead of her insatiable lust for power when she had consistently placed the throne ahead of everything in her life, including her children, is unforgivable slander. And yet his animated corpse lives on against all common sense and established history due to plot armor. To what end? To betray Lord Varys, the man who saved his life when virtually the entire world turned against him. A man who shared his concerns about Daenerys, a man who genuinely cared about the welfare of the people, a man who trusted Tyrion. Tyrion threw that man under the bus and shed nary a tear when his betrayal cost Varys his life, instead of first warning him to desist in no uncertain terms, giving him a chance to back away before selling him down the river. Tyrion was also slain when he was stupid enough to seek refuge from the dead in a loaded crypt and allowed Sansa to convince him to stay when he should have known better, slandered and slain. Jon Snow was slandered and slain. Jon was the prime adversary of the Night King. He was the one man who clearly saw the existential threat of the living dead. He was the man who tried to unite humanity against the threat, and the entire cinematic universe slandered him by rendering him completely irrelevant and impotent, invalidating his entire character arc. For the entire 8th season, he's been pussy-whipped by Daenerys, so busy bending the knee to her that when he finally stood up, he left his balls on the floor. He doesn't even argue for mercy for Lord Varys, and thus his sense of justice is slain. He hides behind a rock wall from the undead dragon, then yells at it instead of stabbing it, so his sense of courage and determination are slain. He hesitates to kill the Night King long enough for the Night King to raise an army against him, blowing his chance, and he abandons his faithful hound Ghost without so much as a goodbye pat on the head, and thus his character is assassinated. Jon Snow was brought back from the dead by the Lord of Light for a purpose. Apparently that purpose was to be as bland and irrelevant as possible. Sam Tarly was slandered and slain. In any honest universe, he would have died in that battle with the dead, being unskilled and a sizable target. Instead, all he got was a boo-boo on the head and a happy ending. Same for everyone else. Arya was slandered and slain. The one purpose she clung to the entire series was to kill Cersei, and she never even heard of the Night King before returning to Winterfell, yet she kills the Night King out of nowhere, not even using her power to assume the identities of the dead as camouflage, and she doesn't kill Cersei, because at the last minute, the Hound shows her his ugly scar, tells her the good news about Jesus, and gives her a copy of the Watchtower to set her on the right path. Or something like that. Basically, I was rolling my eyes the whole time. It didn't quite see exactly what happened. Basically, at the last moment, the Hound says, "You want to wind up like me?" And Arya forgets that she answered that question years ago when she dedicated her life to hateful vengeance. It is slander that she would abandon the quest that has motivated her for damn near the entire series, and the Hound was slandered and slain when Cersei strolls right by him and he just calls her "Your Grace." As if the Hound has ever been deferential to authority, or courteous, or gave a fuck for royals if he didn't have to. And he couldn't even spare one thrust of his sword to kill Cersei, a murderous, vicious monster responsible for all this horror and pain. What a worthless bitch they turned the Hound into. Clegane, slandered and slain, living only to have vengeance on his brother, and it costs him his life. What a lousy battle that was. Pointless. What a shame. The Dothraki were slandered and slain. Despite being decimated en masse in the Battle of Winterfell, when they were dumb enough to charge into the pitch-black night, not knowing who their targets were, where they were, or how many there were, with flaming swords to paint them as targets you can see coming a mile away, which was slander enough. Despite all that, the Dothraki are made a mockery of when they magically respawn for the Battle of King's Landing, completely assassinating their relevance and their believability. Same with the Unsullied, who appear to respawn and repopulate their ranks despite being decimated in Episode 3. Similarly, Grey was slain by Cersei in Episode 4, along with Tyrion, Daenerys, and her last dragon. When they were stupid enough to all stand in killing range of Cersei and their forces, they all survived due to and were assassinated by plot armor of the worst kind. The Battle of King's Landing was therefore a complete joke, a fiction that, despite lasting for a total of 7 minutes before the bells rang, actually never happened, as everyone on Daenerys' side died beforehand. Except they didn't, because of plot armor and the slandering and slaying of Cersei and her replacement in the story with stand-in Jaqueline Lannister, who didn't kill Tyrion and cried like a baby as her castle crumbled around her. The Mountain was slandered and slain when stabbing him through the head with a dagger wasn't enough to take him down in honest zombie fashion, turning Clegane Bowl into a sad and pointless joke. The men of the North and the Unsullied were slandered and slain by turning them into vicious murderers and rapists in the invasion of King's Landing. Sanity was slandered and slain when improbably a white horse walking in slow motion appeared to Arya to save her at the end. Apparently that horse's name was Calgon, and it came to whisk her away. It makes sense that the horse was so shiny and white, given the cleaning power of Calgon. The laws of physics were slandered and slain as Bronn and Arya and the Hound and everyone else moved between King's Landing and Winterfell instantly, despite the enormous distance, and Euron swims several miles to a little cove where he conveniently finds Jaime. And the rocks of King's Landing were slandered and slain when they exploded due to dragon fire, betraying their agreement with natural law that rocks on fire shall not explode, making camping possible. And Missandei was slandered and slain when confronted by her own demise. She abandoned all sense of justice and caring for the oppressed peoples of the world when she told Daenerys, Dracarys, urging her to abandon everything she stood for and raze King's Landing to the ground. But the worst character assassination of all was that of Daenerys Targaryen, the Stormborn Queen, the mother of dragons. If Daenerys stood for anything at all, it was breaking chains, freeing people, and ending oppression. And in the most spectacular betrayal of a character's essential core values in television history, these feckless character assassins posing as writers completely disregard everything Daenerys fought for in this entire series and turn her into a genocidal, murdering maniac in a matter of seconds. Many people have commented on my previous videos that Daenerys was always an egomaniac, always willing to be ruthless to her enemies, always eager to crush resistance. All those things are true, but that is a far cry from systematically and pointlessly murdering in the most painful way possible thousands of innocent and helpless people. This is wanton, pointless cruelty bordering on sheer insanity, and it doesn't work because it seemingly comes out of nowhere, simply because everybody likes Jon better at Westeros Junior High. She's no longer the prom queen of their hearts, and Jon wouldn't kiss her like she wanted him to. A change this radical at this stage of the story is pure nonsense. If you wanted to do that, you needed to establish a cruel streak in Daenerys well in advance of this episode, subtly and consistently, not merely over an episode or two, but throughout the series. Ideally, it should have been something small, something subtle that, when reflected upon later, revealed that she was always capable of killing innocents with callous abandon. For example, if you wanted to show Daenerys had the seeds for horror within her all along, you could have done it in a succinct and low-key way over the entire show. Periodically, throughout the series, and this is merely one example off the top of my head, you could have foreshadowed this dark part of Daenerys by having her notice an ant crawling on the table in front of her and having her crush it casually beneath her thumb. The ant is a solitary creature, not harming anything. So while it might seem a bit callous for her to crush it, viewers could easily have dismissed the action as insignificant, After all, a lot of people hate bugs and stomp on them without much thought, so it wouldn't be telegraphing anything in an overt way. But thematically, as it was repeated in various moments throughout the series, it would have echoed and resonated with Tyrion's famous story of the cruel idiot smashing beetles in the courtyard, thonk, thonk, the wanton destruction of a madman, and the reflexive casualness of the act, of crushing the ant with her thumb while speaking to another character, say, and not even missing a beat in the conversation, would have telegraphed a certain propensity in the so-called breaker of chains, a subtle inclination, a reflex seemingly in contradiction to her inclination toward mercy, so that when she's at last flying above King's Landing, and she sees the desperate people scurrying tiny and frantic below her, and she says, Dracarys, that visual of the people scurrying, with one insert close-up shot in slow motion of Dany's thumb crushing an ant, would have been a payoff for all those little moments, all those little dead ants seeded throughout the series, a reminder that character is action, and that this capacity was within her all along. But instead of that, we got Daenerys reduced to a flip of the coin by the gods, and she landed on the side of madness. A random character decision, a deus ex machina of the worst kind, trying to foist inept writing and subverted characterization onto the narrative ineptitude of the gods themselves. Everything we suffered through with Daenerys was worthless. She was just another nut, just another mad tyrant. All she went through to secure the Dothraki army, worthless since they all died in a heartbeat at the hands of the Night King. All the Unsullied, worthless, since she didn't really need them to take King's Landing. She could have done it easily at any time with her 3 dragons, but she didn't because she wanted to spare the civilians in King's Landing. The civilians she decided to kill in the end because plot reasons. Daenerys was slandered and slain, and so was Game of Thrones. And after Sunday's final episode, I will not return to this series again. My watch will have ended. God only knows what awaits us in the final episode of Game of Thrones, but I will be here to review it and to give you my final verdict on this atrocity. I am also doing a live stream Friday night at 7:00 p.m. Central Standard Time to discuss these slanders and these slayings, and I hope that you will join me there, Friday night, 7:00 p.m. Central Standard Time. From the center of the earth, this is Dictor Van Doomcock bidding you all, my friends, stay angry. Ha 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 ha.